Well, I'm going to mark that off on the bucket list. I've always wanted to come up and speak after a rousing rendition of I Am Superwoman. So here we go. That was awesome. I'm beginning a 4-week teaching series today called Think Pink. And the gist of it comes down to the fact that Jesus had a lot of one-on-one conversations with people. Sometimes just kind of read through Scripture in a real brief way, and you'll find that he was often one-on-one with people, teaching things to people on an individual basis, and a lot of those conversations were with women. And so I thought we'd take a month of October and we would deal with those times in which he taught some of his amazing truths to females. And that doesn't mean that what he had to say only dealt with ladies. In fact, you're going to find out as we go through this month that the principles that he was trying to teach, they are across the board for women and men, and young and old, and rich and poor, and married and single. The whole gamut of humanity has application to what he taught, but for some reason, a lot of his really valuable, important lessons were in conversations with women. Maybe he thought they listened better. I don't know, but he communicated those to them, and we're going to take the month of October and we're going to look at some of those together. Now, it's not a coincidence that we're doing this during the month of October, which is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And when we began to plan the month of October several months ago, we just knew we wanted to do something about this horrible disease that so many people face. And so how could we take our Think Pink series and apply it to this disease and what we can do about it as a church? And so we've got a little project that we're going to ask you to help us with during this whole month. We're going to reach out to a lady in our community who is dealing with breast cancer right now. We're not going to tell you her name. We're going to keep that private for right now. She lives in southern Indiana. She's not a part of our church. And she is fighting this disease with her family as we speak. And we just want to encourage her as a church. And so all month long, we have a wall that is set up on the outside of this room and on the other side of our commons, right before you went into our gym, a large wall that says, "Hey, pretty girl." And sometimes when women face this disease, they have to go through horrible treatments and they lose hair, and that becomes a big deal to them. And we want her to know how pretty she is. And so we're going to take that wall this month, and we have little cards that are back there, blank cards. They say on the top of those, "Hey, pretty girl." And we want you to write her a note. It might be a Bible verse. It might be a prayer that you want to write out. It might just be some words of encouragement to somebody you don't know. But she's our pretty girl this month. And we're going to write notes. We started that on Thursday, and our first service today did it. We're going to ask you, when you leave here today, we don't have a time in our service where we're going to remind you of this because we got so many things we're going to do. So remember it as best you can right now. When you leave, take 5 minutes of your time. Go back here, grab one of those cards, and we're just pinning them up on that board. We want to cover that board with hundreds and hundreds of cards from our church family. And then when we're done in October, we're going to take all those, and we're going to show up at her house. And we're going to show her the love of Jesus through the people of Eastside Christian Church. Isn't that a cool idea? We're going to reach out to her and love on her. And so we're going to do that in combination with this series. And so we're going to be doing that all month long, each weekend. Okay, conversations that Jesus had with women. We're going to start today with one that he had with his mom. It's a real brief conversation. It's just a few words that Jesus communicated with his mom. It's a story about when he turned water into wine. And so I'm going to read it. We're going to start with that, and then we're just going to dive into it. It's in John chapter 2, starting in verse 1. You can follow on the screen if you don't have a Bible with you. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. And Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples also had been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "And dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." Settle on that sentence, "My time has not yet come." My hour has not yet come. Settle on that. We're going to come back to that a lot. And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to his servants, "Fill the jars with water." And so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine, and he didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. And then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice." Would you say that word with me? Let's say it. Choice. You didn't say it. Let's do it. Choice. That's a really important word that we'll talk about today. Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee, and he thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Now, there are a number of, in my notes I call them side notes. They're interesting points of the story that are probably not the driving emphasis of the story, but they're important enough not to totally ignore them. Don't bypass them. And so I just want to briefly mention just a few. Some of them I think are funny. For example, did you notice what Jesus called his mom? Did that grab anybody? Woman. I thought about that, what it would have been like for me if that was the title that I gave to my mom growing up. Woman, when dinner going to be done? Woman, I'm out of clean socks. That probably would not have went well with me. But Jesus called his mom woman. Now, that's probably really not as abrasive as we tend to think, because we know in ancient literature, there were times in cultures where that was a very affectionate name, woman. It'd be kind of like if you were standing next to your mom or next to your girlfriend or something like that, and you put your arm around her and you said, "You're my woman. You're my girl." And that's kind of how Jesus approaches mom. The NIV version that I read and was on the screen, it tries to soften that so we don't catch that abrasiveness. It says that he said, "Dear woman." No, he didn't say "dear woman." He said "woman." But it was a very affectionate tone. And I think along with that, I think one of the funniest parts of the whole story, and I'll come back to it later because it has some emphasis to it. Did you catch where it seems that Mary just totally ignored what Jesus said? Anybody catch that? So he shows up and says, hey, we need you. They're out of wine. And he says, "Hey, it's not my time. Can't do anything about it." And she's looking at him and she goes, "Yeah, whatever. I need you to do this." And she grabbed the servants. My mom used to do that to me all the time. "Clean your room." "Well, Mom, there's 15 reasons why I can't do it." "Well, whatever. Get in there and clean your room." And it almost has this feel that Mary wanted Jesus to be a part of this, and she just kind of looked at him like, "Whatever, dude. Just do what I tell you to do." Fascinating concept, and it's going to come up a little bit later in the point of the text. Now, I'm not a wine drinker, and I don't know too much about wine, to be honest about it, but I know enough to know that this was a crazy amount of wine. 6 jars that held between 20 and 30 gallons. And so Jesus made let's just say it this way, let's round it off. Jesus made 150 gallons of wine. Now, I don't know if it was a massive wedding party. I don't know if they were planning on just getting totally plastered out of their brains that night or if it meant something else. And I'm here to tell you it meant something else. Because it's the very first time that Jesus did a miracle, and he came right out of the gate saying, I can do so much more than you would ever dream. I have no limits to what I can do. And it's fascinating to me, it's the first thing he ever did. Hey, if you tend to feel like I do sometimes, where God might not be pleased with you at times, and if God wanted a meeting with you, it'd be like, oh no, what's going to happen? Watch this. The very first miracle of Jesus was a gift. God is for you, he's not against you. And so there's all these little kind of side notes in the story that are just fascinating to catch. But the reality is that there is a truth embedded in the story that I believe that's the one that ought to grab our attention. And it's all about this timing thing. And now picture this. It's about that moment that you come to in life, whether it's a day or a week long or a season of your life. And you'll know you're there when I describe it. You get to that point and you need God to show up in your life right now. Today. Not tomorrow, not next week, next month. I need you in a big time way in my life right now. And the reality is a lot of people have those points in their life. You ever waited on a promotion? Have you ever been in an interview and then went out just hoping that you'd get the phone call and just keep waiting? Have you ever been looking for any job at all? And if you've ever been there, you know exactly what we're talking about today because you've been there. Sit down and try to talk to a couple who are trying unsuccessfully to conceive a child. Or better yet, talk to a couple who is in the never-ending mountainous pile of adoption papers. And they know what I'm talking about today. Have you ever prayed for a wandering daughter or a wandering son who's lost their way and you're hoping for them to come back? Have you ever held the hand of a parent or a grandparent who is about to breathe their last into the glory that God has for them, and they just keep hanging on and the heart keeps beating? You know what I'm talking about. It's those times when we're begging for God, would you come up? Would you show up in my life right now? God, I need you today. It's been so long since you've come. Any Cubs fans here? You know what I'm talking about. It's been thousands of years, God. And so the whole story kind of wraps up into that. And it's something that applies, again, to everybody, whether you're a woman or a man. We all find ourselves in those points where, God, I just need you to show up, and I need it right now. And this conversation that Jesus has with his mom can encourage you in that. It's a real brief conversation. There's just not much. It's just a couple sentences. The wedding is over. They're now at the reception. They're having food and drink, and everybody's together. And I want you to listen to something very carefully. Mary was a guest. This wasn't her wedding. This wasn't her family's wedding. She was an invited guest. Jesus and all his people were invited guests, just like you've been to wedding receptions where you were an invited guest. And so what was it about Mary when she saw they ran out of wine that she thought she should do something about it? I mean, think of this. You're in the line at a wedding reception, you're getting the food, and you go up to the tub that's got the chicken wings, and they're out of chicken wings. Who here has the gall to go, hey, we got a problem over here? Who would do that? For some reason, Mary brought that up. And Mary went to Jesus, her son, and said, you do something about that. And what's strange about that is that Jesus had not done any miracles yet. Jesus was just a normal 30-year-old guy at this point. He hadn't kicked out his ministry publicly yet. And so they had no idea that Jesus could do anything about it. So how did Mary know that Jesus could do something. You moms will know this. You know the answer. Because you moms see things in your kids that nobody else sees. We say it's the eyeballs in the back of the head, but it's more than that. It's a sense. You perceive things. I can't tell you how many times my wife, when our kids were growing up, she would sense something about one of the boys. And she said, I kind of sense this about them, or I kind of sense they're dealing with this, or I kind of sense that's going on in their life. And I'm looking from the football game and trying to listen to her, and I would always respond, "Woman, you're crazy. You're out of your mind." I didn't call her woman, but you get the good. And you know what? Almost always she was right. Because moms have a way of seeing things that nobody else has. And for some reason that we don't know why, Mary makes a big deal that they're out of wine. It's not even her wedding. And she goes to get her son and ask him to do something about it. And here's what he says: "I can't do that. It's not my time, Mom." Because Jesus knew that the plan of God was for him to begin about a 3-year ministry. And as he conducted that ministry, the antagonism toward him would grow and grow and grow. And he'd eventually die on a cross in an execution. And he would raise from that tomb all around the Passover of a particular year. And Jesus knew that if he started that thing too early, that the execution may happen earlier and the whole timing gets wigged out. And so he says to his mom, I can't do that. It's not my time yet. And what Jesus was saying is a truth that everybody's got to wrestle with, and you got to understand. If you've ever been at a point where you need God to show up right now, you need to understand that only God controls the time. See, we want to control the time. We want to tell God when he needs to show up, what he needs to be doing. And Jesus was saying, I don't even control that. Only God controls that. When I first got married, that was one of the things that we kind of struggled with as a couple. I get asked that a lot of times. We've been married for 33 years now. And I'm asked from time to time, when you first started, did you have any things that were wrinkles you had to work through? And we didn't have a lot, but one of them was time. And it was all me, because I'd spent a number of years of my life after high school that I didn't have to report to anybody where I was going or when I was going to be somewhere. I just did what I wanted to do. And now I've got this foreigner in my house expecting things from me. It reached a height one time. It's a joke now to us. What a joke then. She asked me, I said out of the house I was going to go play golf with some friends of mine. And she asked the question, when are you going to be home? Just real innocent, when are you going to be home? And it was brimming over, and it just hit me wrong. And I said this, and I said it about like this. I said, you know what, here's the deal. When the car's home, that's probably when I'm going to be home. That didn't go real well. That's the last time I gave that kind of a response. And that's what we do with God. Is that we control the time. We know when you need to be doing something. So if you're one of the people in the room right now, I happen to be one of them, who you just need, would you do your stuff today? I really need you to do your stuff today. Right now. And here's what God says. You don't control that time. I control that time. Only I control that time. Now watch. If that's true, I'm going to wear him out in prayer. If he's the one that opens the gate for when he comes to my aid, I'm going to wear him out in prayer. God, if you control the time, I want you to know I need you right now. And I'm going to wear it out. See, what is God going to think if you need him right now and you want him right now into your life, but you don't tell him that? And so there's something about this idea that I'm going to wear him out. And that leads to a part of the story that, gang, I just don't completely understand. And I want to play with that for a second. I'm going to tell you something that happens in the story that in my mind, I just can't quite understand it. I can't wrap my thinking around it. I'm not exactly sure what it means. And that's hard for me to confess to you. Somebody on Thursday night were one of our guests in our worship that day, and he grabbed me out in the commons after services, and he says, I want to tell you something, dude. He goes, I've been going to churches all my life, and it's the only time I've ever been in a church where the preacher stood up and said, I really don't know what this verse means. I said, oh man, you ought to come more often. I say that all the time. And that bothers me. I probably can't communicate it to the degree that I want, but I take what I do as a preacher very seriously. And I want to be able to stand up with you on the weekends and say, I have dug into this text in Scripture. I have studied it. I've prayed over it. I've evaluated it. I've talked with other people about it. And here's what God is saying in that verse. And I take that really, really serious. And so it bothers me when I come up and say, hey, I've driven into this text, and there's a part of it that I'm not sure I comprehend. And it happens here. It happens when Mary goes to her son and says, hey, we need you to take care of this. And he says, it's not my time. I'm not going to do that. That's his call. It's not my call. I'm just not going to do that. And did you notice that it seems Mary ignored him like we said earlier? Whatever. Just do what you got to do. And Jesus did it. Did the Lord alter his timing because one of his children was begging him to? Wrestle with that. Don't miss that question. Does God kind of come up with plan B in his mind because his children have pleaded for his involvement? It sure seems to be the case here. And I'm not sure I comprehend that. I'm not sure I understand how all that happens. And I feel confident in saying that God would never abandon his general will in the world of your life just to satisfy you. But will he ever flex it? It seems that he may. I think it's a fascinating concept that we don't quite totally understand, that there is this attentiveness from God when we express our need for his power to show up right now. When our middle child was born, he wasn't too crazy about coming into the world. That was back in the days when we just didn't do a lot of C-sections. Those things didn't happen very often, only in dire cases. And I was married. My wife just did not want to have that done. She was against, we're not doing C-section. So when our middle son was about to come into the world, on the 4th day of labor, ladies, just wail out a little bit on that one, okay? On the 4th day of labor, the doctor came in and did his stuff, and he motioned to me, and we went out in the hallway. He's a friend of mine. And we got out in the hallway, and he said, we're going to have to do a C-section. And I said, you know what she thinks about that? He goes, I know that, but we're going to have to do that. And I said, well, are you going to tell her? He said, no, you're going to tell her. I said, she's not going to like that. And he said, here's the deal, Dave. I'm going to be back here in 1 hour, and we're going to do a C-section, go get your baby. And I went back in the room, and my poor queen is, 4 days. She's just gone emotionally. And what'd he say? What'd he say? I said, he said, you're doing great. You're doing great. And I knelt down at her, and I held her hand. I said, honey, we just got to pray. And I prayed that God would do his stuff and not wait any longer. And I'm telling you, gang, it's 3-4 minutes. Nurse comes in afterwards, does her say, see, we got a baby here. And within 10 minutes, I'm holding my second son. Did God change his timing? I don't know. but it sure seemed that he did. And I'm sure there's far more instances where God is not going to change his timing in your life. He's set on that. But I cannot deny the times where it seems he responds to our pleas. He told a story about a woman who went to a judge for justice, and the judge says, no, I'm not going to give it to you. So she went back the next day. No, I'm not going to give it to you. She went back the next day, and she kept going every day until he finally said, all right, I'll give you justice. And he taught that parable about prayer. And so I take this story about the timing of Jesus, and he makes it clear that God controls what's going on in your life. He controls when he's going to show up. And because of that, man, there ought to be a passionate plea of wearing him out, because will that ever alter his timing? I don't know. I cannot deny, though, that it might. And then that leads to the enormity of wine at the scene. Did you catch how we compared the wine at the start of the banquet and the end of the banquet? Did you catch that? I asked you to read a word. The banquet at the end, the wine was called choice. The wine at the beginning of the banquet was called cheap. Cheap and choice. Wonder why those two things are there. Wonder why the wine was completely different. Most scholars would suggest this. I tend to agree that it seems to be the point of the parable. Is that God's timing is always perfect. God's timing is always best. And in comparison to his timing, my timing is cheap. And so if you're in a setting in your life right now where you just feel, God, you have got to come. I know you control it. I need you to show up, God. And you're pleading that. You're wearing him out. And he has not responded. Then the call is for you to understand your way is best. Your way is choice. I trust that. I trust that. I don't understand it, but I trust it. A man by the name of Louis learned that. Louis graduated from high school and he just didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. And so he took the route that a lot of people in his day and age took. He joined the service, got into the Air Force. He spent 4 years, saw a lot of the world. And while he was there, they taught him to do things with his hands. He learned mechanical things. He learned how to fix different things. And a lot of it was kind of an electronic nature. Back in his day, that was all kind of new stuff. And for 4 years, the military took him and he became a master with those things. And at the end of his military career, he just knew that he could take all that they had taught him how to do, and he could use it to fulfill his lifelong dream. And his dream was that he grew up in this little town that had a hospital that for some reason Louis would say he doesn't even know why, but as a little kid he always wanted to work at the hospital. Probably because most people in town worked at the hospital. And so he'd always had this thought that I'm going to work there. And when he got done with the service, he said, man, I got some stuff that it can work. I can use it in that department in the hospital. And so as he leaves the service, he goes straight to the hospital. I want to work here, spend the rest of my life in my hometown. And they said, we don't have openings here. We're a little town. Everybody wants to work. We don't have any openings. And Louis was just disgruntled and concerned for 4 years in the service. He told God, you're going to use this. I'm going to be able to work at the hospital. And now instead of he's flipping burgers to pay his bills. Sit down and have a cup of coffee with Louis, and he would tell you in honesty what some of us think. And that is, while I'm flipping the burgers to pay the bills, I'm wondering, now why won't you let me do what I want to do? He talks about the time in which he'd heard there was an opening at the hospital, and he said, I want to be the first guy there. And he literally rushed to the hospital. And I want to apply for it. And they said, yeah, we got an opening. And I've learned to do these things in this service. And they said, oh, the opening in for that department. Our nurses are just crazy busy around here. We need somebody who will clean out bedpans, and we need somebody who will mop up blood under the surgery tables, and we need somebody who will prepare the corpses and get them to the morgue. And Louis said, that's all you got? He goes, that's all we got. When he tells the stories, you're having coffee with him, he says, in his mind, he thought, okay, God, this is how you're going to do it, man. You're going to kind of get me in the door, and I'm going to be here for a month or so, and then I get to go do what I long to do. And he said he prayed that and wondered that while cleaning bedpans for 8 years. And during those 8 years, wondering, when are you going to show up? Why haven't you shown up yet? And the job finally opens up in that department, and he's first on the scene. He found out that it opened up only because there was somebody retired. Nobody ever quit that job. And a guy had retired in his life. And he wasn't going to retire 8 years ago. He retired then. And there's some kind of quirky thing they had in the hospital at that time. They only hired internally. And since Louis was already in the system, Louis got the job and spent the rest of his life in a career that he wanted. And he would say this: for years, I had to trust that his timing was best, not mine. So can I ask you to get there? With whatever timing you're wrestling through in your life right now, and you need the hand of God to show up this afternoon and deal with this. Well, don't give up, because he might. But if he doesn't, God, your choice, I'm cheap. Your choice, and I'm cheap. As I look back in my life, I see all the times that you were choice. I want you to sing that today. That's how I want to end our study today. I want us to sing it. Now, I know some of y'all don't sing, but I want you to sing. Because we're going to take a song that talks about the fact that we know he has our best interest in mind. As we look back, he's always been right. And he will always be right in the future. And he'll be right in your life. And I want to invite you to stand with me, and let's sing this together.